Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the America's Founding series on the P.A.S. Report podcast. As your host, Nick Giordano, make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends. This is a really important episode because today I'm going to switch things up a little bit in honor of July 4th. Normally on the America's Founding series, I focus on the forgotten patriots that have not received their due. Patriots, most Americans never even heard of. But for today, I want to explore the document that changed the course of human history, and I'm doing this in honor of July 4th. So this is a special edition, and the Declaration of Independence goes beyond just a mere historical document. We're talking about the birth of an idea, a set of principles that change the world forever and our very way of life. This began to lay out what I call the new political philosophy, an American political philosophy. We're going to look at the Committee of Five who wrote this document, the influences on the words that inspired the Declaration. But more importantly, I'm going to break down the Declaration's core tenets of what it actually says. We're going to examine what it means to be American and how the Declaration of Independence began to create this new American identity. So let's set the stage. According to the founding father, John Adams, we're actually celebrating the wrong day because on July 2nd, 1776, the Continental Congress voted to declare our independence from the British Crown. And it was a moment that Adams believed would be immortalized in history. In fact, he wrote to his wife, Abigail, saying, quote, "I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion of God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shoes, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other from this time forward forevermore." Amazing. He was off by 2 days. And while the vote was on the 2nd, the Declaration of Independence was formally adopted and published on July 4th. And that's why that day stuck. That's why we celebrate July 4th as Independence Day. Before its publication, this document was carefully crafted. It was hammered out by a group known as the Committee of Five, where you had John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Robert Livingston, Roger Sherman, who I covered in detail a few episodes ago, so make sure you check that out. But of course, the primary author is going to be Thomas Jefferson. And if you're a regular listener of the America's Founding series, you would know that Jefferson had some help from an unexpected source. For those that don't know, I'll briefly touch on it in a minute. But getting to the heart of the matter, the Declaration of Independence was not a legally binding document. It didn't establish a government or a set of laws. It was first and foremost a moral statement to the world, a justification for revolution. As I always like to say and tell my classes, the Declaration of Independence was forged with thought, but the American Revolution was won by blood. And what it did, what the Declaration did, is it began to lay out the American political philosophy, setting forth the tenets of what we can call the American creed. And this creed is what defines us. When people ask me how one becomes Americanized, or what makes a person American, or what the melting pot truly means, I always tell them it's about accepting these core tenets. It's where you shed some of your cultural identity, the native culture that you come from, and you begin to adopt this new American identity, not one based on race, ethnicity, religion, or where one comes from. It's about accepting a set of principles as a way of life. And when we look at these core tenets, there's even an Italian influence that I mentioned earlier, Filippo Mazzei. Filippo Mazzei was a very close friend and neighbor of Thomas Jefferson in Virginia. He was an Italian merchant, and Mazzei wrote in Italian several years before the Declaration was published that, quote, "all men by nature are equally free and independent." He gave this speech at a Virginia church. Thomas Jefferson translated it. He spoke Italian, and these two heavily debated what true liberty looks like, not in the theoretical, but in reality. So this phrase, which echoes so powerfully in the Declaration, highlights the intellectual exchange that fueled the American Revolution. And I covered Filippo Mazzei in the very first episode of the America's Founding series when we launched, and it is well worth your time to check that out. But I want to break down the most important parts of the Declaration line by line, because so many people were never fully taught what this document actually means. And it's a sad state of affairs. When we have an education system that they bring up the Declaration of Independence in a couple of years, maybe like fourth grade and then 11th grade, but students don't really read it. They're not focused on it. They're not really going line by line. So we have an education system that doesn't teach about one of the most important documents in human history, not just American history. And then many of you out there may have learned about the Declaration in elementary school, but you have long forgotten its true meaning because you haven't been in school in decades. And this is a document that we should be reading each and every year on July 4th to celebrate our founding. Others are saying, well, I've read it several times. I know the lines. But do you know what the lines and the words actually mean? And that's what we're going to explore today. And we're going to start with one of our first tenets. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident truths. I don't think people fully understand the brilliance of this line. These are not human-made truths that require government acceptance to be valid. These don't require any type of human acceptance. They are natural truths, universal and timeless. They are inherent within us. They don't need a king or a parliament to make them so. To the founders, truth exists in the nature of everything, and it does not depend upon human acceptance to give it its binding force of validity. That line, self-evident truths, is so important, and it dovetails perfectly with the next line, that all men are created equal. With this one, this is where you get the wackos who believe this proves the founding fathers are sexist. But understand, 18th century English is much different than today, the 21st century. In 18th century language, man was synonymous with humankind, with all human beings. And another problem is that as human beings in the 21st century, we tend to take everything as literal, especially Americans. The founders didn't literally mean that all human beings are equal, they're identical. That's not what they meant. They recognized that we are all unique in our talents and abilities. We all have different desires and passions. They understood that. They understood the mindset of human beings. What they were saying is that as human beings, that we all deserve equal dignity and we should be treated with such. Now, I recognize the hypocrisy of this statement when, at the time, slavery was a brutal reality. But it's a testament to the power of these ideals that the Declaration of Independence was later used as the driving force to end the slave trade and ultimately end slavery itself. In fact, Thomas Jefferson, who did have slaves, he actually included a provision on slavery in his initial draft of the Declaration of Independence, but it was removed by Congress, the Continental Congress, because they felt it would be too divisive here in the colonies, and then the South, the southern states may end up supporting the British crown. So when we look at it, we have to understand all men are created equal. It's talking about equal dignity, equal respect. Then we move on that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Again, this is another powerful line. This is a monumental statement. We do not derive these rights from government. Far too many people believe that the government grants us our rights, but these rights exist because we are human beings, and our existence is far greater than any state, than any government. Our rights precede it. Among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the famous three. These are rights no government should ever attempt to take away. When it comes to life, Thomas Jefferson believed that the preservation of innocent life, not the destruction of it, is the first job of government. When it comes to liberty, this is not a free-for-all. It's not anarchy or chaos. It's the natural condition of human beings where we get to exercise our free will responsibly in accord with the dictates of right reason and natural law. And when it comes to the pursuit of happiness, we have a right to pursue what will make us happy in life as long as we are not harming or infringing on someone else's rights. This is a subtle but key distinction from John Locke's idea of property. Jefferson shifted the focus from material possessions to personal fulfillment. And ultimately, what this all means is one thing. We do not exist to serve government, that the government exists to serve us. Now, we're going to look at how these ideas transform the purpose of government forever, how they changed everything. And I want to discuss the final line that would seal the Founding Fathers' fate. I want to move to what the Declaration says about the role of government itself, because the Declaration's next lines fundamentally are going to redefine the relationship between we, the people, and the state apparatus. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This is a revolutionary idea that government exists to ensure and secure the rights of the people. It is not the master over the people. It is simply a tool. And no government is going to be legitimate without the consent of the governed. It seems today that too many in public service, and even ordinary Americans, they've forgotten this very basic premise. Many believe that government officials have the right to rule over the people, and it's not supposed to work that way. We have to change that mindset. That's why we've seen the bureaucratic growth explode within the United States. That's why anytime something goes wrong, people turn to the government to fix that problem rather than look internally within themselves and their communities to solve those problems. That's why the federal government is far more powerful today than our founding fathers ever intended. And we have to understand, we have to look at what happens when the government fails the very people they are supposed to serve. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter and abolish it. So this is the ultimate check on power that the Founding Fathers believed. As citizens, we have a responsibility and obligation to ensure our government serves as a tool of justice, that we are the line between liberty and tyranny. It's not designed for the government to give us stuff. That's not what the Founding Fathers are talking about. And they're not advocating for chaos. They actually included a critical qualifier in the Declaration of Independence that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. You don't overthrow a government just because you're unhappy with a policy that they may have passed. That's what elections are for. The founders were not anarchists. They were prudent statesmen, something that is severely lacking today in our political system. And the threshold for revolution is only met when there is a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object that evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. When a government consistently attempts to exercise absolute power, ruling oppressively by denying our fundamental rights, that government has become a tool of injustice. And when that happens, it is the right of the people. It is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. This is a moral duty we have to hold government officials accountable. And we failed in that. Now, as we look at this Declaration of Independence, as we begin to wrap this up, I want to look at the very last line of the Declaration of Independence, because this is what turns ordinary men into extraordinary men. What the founders did was truly amazing. It was unique. It changed the course of history. And the final line reads, "And for support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." These are some of the most powerful words ever written. There are some who argue that the founders didn't care about liberty, that's a lie, it's a myth. That the founders only cared about making money, that if Britain was out of the picture, they could get even wealthier than many of them already was. Now, this is a flat-out lie. That is not true, and this is the one line that easily dispels that myth, because the Founding Fathers weren't stupid people. They understood that their chances of victory in the American Revolution were incredibly low. They were going against one of the most powerful, well-trained, well-equipped militaries, not just in that time period, but in the history of the world. At the time of the Revolution, the British Royal Navy was the largest and most powerful naval force globally, with hundreds of ships. When we look at the soldiers, the British soldiers, they were in the military for years. What were we, a bunch of farmers? And when we look at the Founding Fathers, many of them had wealth. Many of them were well respected in British circles. Many of the Founding Fathers that would sign on to this document had nothing to gain financially and everything to lose. So when they signed this document, when they sent it off to England, They were signing their own death warrants. And they had to know that if the revolution failed, King George is not going to pardon them. King George is not going to say, oh, we were a little too harsh on you. We understand that. We're going to change our ways. King George isn't going to be like, let's let bygones be bygones. The Founding Fathers knew that by signing on to this document, they were signing on to their death sentences. They would be tried and executed for treason if the revolution failed. And many of the Founding Fathers that signed on to this document did lose everything. Of the 56 signers, 17 of them lost their fortunes. 12 of them had their homes ransacked and burned to the ground. Some even went to debtor's prison after the American Revolution. 2 lost sons in the war. One, Francis Lewis, had his wife jailed by the enemy, and it led to her death within a few months. Their signature was a pledge of everything they held dear. And for many, that pledge came at a devastating cost. How many people today that are living well off would put it all on the line for a cause much greater than themselves, would be willing to sacrifice everything for something so much bigger? And it's easy to say that we would do that. But when it really came down to it, would we? What the Founding Fathers did cannot be cheapened or denigrated, and nor should it be. Too many Americans were taught to despise the very country that provided them with so much opportunity. Too many Americans are ignorant of our history, and it's why they have so little appreciation for this exceptional nation. A nation that changed the course of human history. I mean, just imagine for a moment a world where the United States never existed. What would it look like? What would have happened? Would the British continue to dominate, take over, colonize everywhere? What would have happened in World War I, World War II? What would have happened with slavery? Again, this document was the main vehicle to end the slave trade, ultimately ending slavery. So what would the world look like today without America? Imagine a China-dominated world, a Russian-dominated world, a Turkish-dominated world, a world where there would be no constitution, no real natural rights doctrine except through philosophers, no free speech, no free press, no free religion the way we know it. This is why many people view the victory of the American Revolution as an act of divine providence. In every computer simulation model, when you put in the variables, the military might, the financial resources, Britain is going to win 9.9 times out of 10. And yet we won. And the truth is, we never should have won. This July 4th, we need to honor and recognize what our Founding Fathers did. We need to honor and celebrate the Declaration of Independence. This led to America being the exceptional nation that it's become. We went from a weak nation to the most powerful nation in the history of the world, and it's important to understand that with all that power, we have abused it less than any other nation or empire to ever exist, even when it comes and has been to our own detriment, even when it's against our self-interest. Every American living here today should be grateful, no matter how bad your life may be, no matter how ugly our politics may get. You are shielded from the horrors that take place every single day across the globe. You hit the lottery being here. So we should honor the sacrifices that our Founding Fathers made for this great nation. We should honor all those that paid the ultimate sacrifice in defense of this nation. But most importantly, we should recommit ourselves to the American creed. Remember what the American identity is all about, what it truly took to make this nation possible. Now, if you found the content of this episode informative, please leave the P.A.S. report a 5-star rating on any podcast platform that allows it, and take 30 seconds to write a good review, particularly on Apple Podcasts, because that helps with discoverability. And share this episode with your family and friends. Listen to it more than once. Listen to it with your children so that they understand what America is about. They understand the importance.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at pasreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.